There are people who walk into a room and everything shifts, not because they're commanding attention or trying to dominate the space, but because they carry something that most others have forgotten, or perhaps never possessed in the first place. If you're watching this video, there's a good chance you're one of them. Carl Jung spent his life mapping the human psyche with unprecedented precision. He identified the archetypes that govern how we move through the world: the hero, who conquers challenges; the sage who seeks wisdom; the innocent who trusts in goodness; the rebel who breaks rules; the lover who seeks connection. Each archetype serves a function, plays a role in the grand theater of human experience. But there's one archetype Jung pointed toward, but never fully named. It exists in the spaces between his other categories, not quite fitting any of them, yet somehow containing elements of all. This is what we might call the archetype of the witness, the flame, the bridge, the 1% who live with an unshakable coherence between their inner truth and outer presence. If you've ever felt like you're observing life from behind glass, if your silence seems to speak louder than others' words, if people are both drawn to and slightly unsettled by your energy, if you've always felt older than your years, if authenticity feels like both a superpower and a burden, then this video was made specifically for you. Over the next hour and a half, we're going to dive deep into what it means to carry this rare frequency. We'll explore why it feels both like a gift and a curse, how it affects every area of your life from childhood through adulthood, and most importantly, how to thrive rather than just survive with this archetypal pattern. This isn't about being better than others. This isn't about spiritual superiority or psychological elitism. This is about understanding why you're different, why that difference has been both your greatest strength and your deepest source of loneliness, and how to transform that understanding into a life of authentic power and genuine connection. We're going to get uncomfortable in this video. We're going to touch on truths that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. We're going to examine the shadow side of being rare, the costs of living authentically, and the weight of carrying truth in a world built on performance. But we're also going to discover why your particular way of being is not just valid, but necessary. So settle in, turn off distractions. This is going to be a journey into the depths of what makes you who you are. Let's start with the most fundamental characteristic, what I call the birthmark of silence. Some people are not born loud. They are born haunted by silence, not as absence, but as a presence that watches through them. When you were a child, did adults ever comment on how serious you were, how you seemed to be thinking about things beyond your years? Did they say you were an old soul, or that you seemed to understand things other children didn't? This wasn't precocity in the traditional sense. It wasn't advanced intellectual development or early academic achievement. It was something else entirely, a kind of ancient knowing that seemed to skip the usual developmental stages. Jung understood that certain individuals come into the world already carrying what he called archetypal weight. While most children are absorbed in the immediate world of play and discovery, exploring their environment through action and reaction, you were processing something deeper. You were born with what we might call the birthmark of silence, a quality that makes you naturally observant rather than participatory. This silence isn't empty space waiting to be filled. It's not shyness or social anxiety, though it's often mistaken for both. It's not the absence of something, it's the presence of everything. It's pregnant with awareness, saturated with perception, heavy with understanding that you can't quite put into words, but can't ignore either. When you speak, your words carry a different weight because they emerge from this deeper place. They've been filtered through layers of consideration that most people don't even know exist. You don't speak to fill space or maintain social comfort. You speak when you have something to say, and when you do, people listen, even when they're not sure why. When you're quiet, others feel exposed. Not because you're judging them, you're usually too busy observing the complex dance of human interaction to judge anyone, but because your presence invites a kind of honesty that most people aren't prepared for. Your silence creates space for truth to emerge, and truth makes people uncomfortable when they're used to living in performance. Think about it. How many times have you been in a group where everyone was talking, laughing, performing some version of social connection, and you were just watching? Not judging, not disapproving, just witnessing the intricate patterns of human behavior unfolding in front of you. And how many times did your quiet observation make others suddenly self-conscious about their own performance? This observational quality isn't something you developed as a defense mechanism or survival strategy. It's wired into your archetypal blueprint. You're naturally positioned as the witness, the one who sees patterns others miss because they're too caught up in creating or maintaining those patterns. Pause here for a moment. If this resonates with you, if you recognize this quality of silence in yourself, if you've always been the observer rather than the performer, leave a comment with just one word: witnessed. I want to see how many of us are actually out there. This observational stance gives you access to information others don't have. You see the gap between what people say and what they mean. You notice when someone's energy doesn't match their words. You pick up on the undercurrents of emotion, the unspoken tensions, the things people are trying not to say. This isn't psychic ability. It's the natural result of being present rather than performing. But here's where it gets complicated. This gift of perception comes with a cost. When you can see through the social theater that most people rely on for connection and comfort, when you can sense the artificial nature of so much social interaction, it becomes almost impossible to participate in it with genuine enthusiasm. You find yourself going through the motions, playing the expected roles, but feeling like you're acting in a play where everyone else believes they're living real life. This is the first burden of the 1%, the burden of seeing clearly in a world that runs on collective illusion. You can't unsee what you see. You can't unknow what you know. And once you recognize the performative nature of so much human interaction, you can never again fully lose yourself in the performance. Your childhood was different, wasn't it? Not necessarily traumatic or difficult, though it may have been, but different in ways that were hard to explain to others and sometimes hard to understand yourself. While other children were naturally absorbed in the world of play, you were simultaneously participating in childhood and observing it. You played games, but part of you was always aware that they were games. You went through the motions of being a child while carrying an awareness that felt much older than your years. Teachers might have called you mature, responsible, thoughtful, but they also might have worried about you. Why doesn't she play with the other children more? Why does he prefer to read alone during recess? Why does she ask such complex questions? These weren't signs of social dysfunction. They were signs of operating from a different archetypal template. You probably had moments as a child where you felt like you were watching life from the outside, even when you were participating in it. Birthday parties where you enjoyed the celebration, but also found yourself observing the social dynamics. Family gatherings where you loved your relatives but felt like you were studying a fascinating anthropological exhibit. School events where you participated but felt like you were seeing the artificial structure of it all. This dual consciousness, being in the experience while simultaneously observing it, created a unique kind of loneliness. You were surrounded by peers, but you were processing the shared experiences on a completely different level. While they were absorbed in the immediate reality of childhood, the games, the friendships, the simple pleasures, you were aware of layers of meaning and complexity that they wouldn't encounter for years, if ever. You might have found yourself gravitating toward adults who seemed to recognize something in you, who treated you more like a small adult than a typical child. These connections felt more natural because they acknowledged the ancient quality you carried, but they also set you apart from your peer group even more. Many 1%ers report having what Jung might call archetypal dreams as children. Dreams that seemed too complex, too symbolic, too meaningful for a young mind to create. Dreams about ancient places, wise figures, cosmic themes, existential questions. These weren't nightmares or anxiety dreams. They were downloads of information that your young conscious mind couldn't fully process, but your archetypal blueprint could receive and store. You might have been drawn to books, music, or art that other children found boring or too complex. While your peers were consuming age-appropriate entertainment, you were gravitating towards stories and ideas that spoke to something deeper in you. This wasn't intellectual precocity, it was soul recognition. Your inner landscape matched the complexity of what you were drawn to consume. School presented unique challenges. The educational system is designed for children who learn in groups, who thrive on external motivation, who need structured social interaction to develop properly. But you learned differently. You needed space to process, time to integrate, freedom to explore ideas at your own pace. Group projects felt artificial. Competitive activities felt pointless. Much of what passed for education felt like training for a life you couldn't imagine wanting to live. You might have been labeled as gifted, but the gifts you carried weren't always the ones that translated into academic success. Your gift was perception, wisdom, depth, qualities that are difficult to measure and often go unrecognized in traditional educational settings. The hardest part of childhood for the 1% is often the growing awareness that you process life differently than others, but not having the language or framework to understand why. You begin to sense that something about you makes others uncomfortable, but you can't figure out what it is or how to change it. You start to wonder if there's something wrong with you, if you're broken in some fundamental way. This is where many 1%ers first learn to perform normalcy. You start paying attention to how other children behave and trying to mimic their responses. You laugh when others laugh, even if you don't find something funny. You express excitement about things that seem meaningless to you. You learn to hide your depth because depth makes others uncomfortable. But performance is exhausting, especially for someone whose natural state is authenticity. This is where the pattern of feeling drained by social interaction often begins, not because you're introverted in the traditional sense, but because maintaining a false self requires constant energy. You've always felt just outside the social circle, not rejected but distant, as if viewing human rituals from behind a glass wall. This position used to make you feel broken. Maybe it still does sometimes. But what if I told you this isn't a flaw in your social programming, it's a feature of your archetypal design? The sacred outsider is an ancient pattern that appears in cultures throughout human history. In traditional societies, these were the shamans who lived at the edge of the village, the oracles who saw what others couldn't see, the wise women who understood the mysteries others feared to explore. They were consulted but not included in daily social rituals. They were respected but also slightly feared. They held necessary wisdom, but that wisdom came with isolation. You occupy this same archetypal position in modern society. You're not excluded from groups, you exist adjacent to them. You can participate in social activities, workplace dynamics, family gatherings, but there's always that sense of being slightly outside, slightly removed, slightly observing rather than fully absorbed. This position gives you a unique perspective on human behavior that most people don't have access to. You can see the unspoken rules that govern social interaction because you're not emotionally invested in following them. You can observe the patterns of group dynamics because you're not caught up in maintaining your position within the group. You can recognize the performance aspects of social connection because you're not performing, you're witnessing. From this vantage point, you notice things that participants miss. You notice when someone's energy doesn't match their words. You notice when groups are performing unity they don't actually feel. You notice when individuals are sacrificing their authenticity to maintain their social position. You notice the difference between genuine connection and social maintenance. And once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them. This is both your gift and your burden. You have access to truth about human nature that others miss, but that truth can be profoundly isolating. You're like someone who's learned to see through a magic trick. You can appreciate the skill involved, but you can never again experience the wonder of believing in the illusion. The sacred outsider position also means you become a repository for others' projections. Because you exist slightly outside normal social categories, people project onto you whatever they need you to represent. You might be seen as wise, mysterious, aloof, judgmental, inspiring, threatening, often all at the same time, often by the same person. These projections aren't about who you actually are. They're about what your presence stirs up in others. Your refusal to perform standard social roles creates a blank screen onto which others project their own relationship with authenticity, depth, and truth. Some people are inspired by what they see in you. Others are threatened by it. Most are confused by it. Understanding this projection dynamic is crucial for your psychological health. When someone calls you cold, they might be projecting their fear of emotional depth. When someone calls you arrogant, They might be projecting their own insecurity about intellectual or spiritual matters. When someone calls you intense, they might be projecting their discomfort with genuine presence. The sacred outsider position also comes with what Jung called the privilege of perspective. Because you're not emotionally invested in maintaining social illusions, you can see possibilities that others miss. You can suggest solutions that haven't occurred to those who are caught up in the problem. You can offer insights that cut through the complexity because you're not attached to any particular outcome. But this privilege comes with responsibility. When you can see clearly, others expect you to guide them. When you understand patterns others don't recognize, they want you to explain everything. When you remain calm in chaos, they want you to be their anchor. The sacred outsider often becomes the unofficial therapist, advisor, and wisdom keeper for their social circles, without ever asking for that role. This can lead to a unique form of burnout. You're constantly being asked to share your perspective, to solve others' problems, to provide stability for their emotional chaos. But who provides that same service for you? Who sees your complexity, your struggles, your need for understanding and support? Quick check-in. How many times this week has someone come to you with their problems, seeking your perspective or advice? If this happens regularly, if you've become the unofficial counselor for others, comment below with "Always the advisor." Let's acknowledge how common this pattern is for our type. The challenge of the sacred outsider position is learning to honor your unique perspective while still finding ways to connect authentically with others. It's learning to use your outside position as a strength rather than a source of isolation. And it's learning to protect your energy while still being available for genuine connection with those rare individuals who can meet you where you are. Let's talk about something you've definitely noticed, but might never have understood. Rooms change when you arrive. Not dramatically, not obviously, but something shifts. The energy recalibrates. Conversations pause for just a beat too long. People suddenly become more conscious of what they're saying, how they're presenting themselves, what they're revealing without meaning to. This isn't because you're intimidating or judgmental. You might be the gentlest, most accepting person in the world, and this would still happen. It's because authenticity has its own gravitational field, and when someone who lives in alignment enters a space where others are performing versions of themselves, there's an automatic energetic adjustment that happens at the unconscious level. Jung understood this phenomenon through his concept of psychic contagion. Your nervous system, operating from a place of coherence and authenticity, subtly invites others' nervous systems to match that frequency. But here's the thing. Most people's nervous systems aren't accustomed to that level of authenticity. It's like they've been living in artificial light for so long that natural sunlight feels overwhelming. So they either rise to meet your frequency, which can feel vulnerable and exposing, or they resist it, which creates that subtle tension you've learned to recognize. Some people lean into your presence, suddenly finding themselves more honest, more real, more willing to drop their social masks. Others pull back, become more performative, more defensive, more artificial in response to your authenticity. You don't reflect others like a mirror. Mirrors simply show what's already there without changing anything. You function more like a gentle flame, and anything false near that flame begins to melt. People might sit with you and feel completely safe until they realize they've told you things they've never told anyone else. Shared thoughts they didn't even know they were thinking. Revealed aspects of themselves they usually keep hidden. Your presence creates what we might call a truth field. Not because you're forcing honesty or demanding revelation, but because your own authenticity makes pretense feel uncomfortable and unsustainable. In your presence, people either become more real or more fake. There's rarely a middle ground. This dynamic explains why some people seek you out, while others instinctively avoid you. Those who are comfortable with their own authenticity, who are doing their own inner work, who are tired of performing and ready for real connection, they're drawn to your energy like plants to sunlight. But those who are heavily invested in their personas, who have built their identity around their social masks, who aren't ready to face their own contradictions, they find your presence uncomfortable, even threatening. You've probably noticed that small talk feels particularly draining for you. It's not that you're antisocial or think you're too good for casual conversation. It's that your nervous system is calibrated for depth, and surface-level interaction feels like trying to breathe underwater. Your energy wants to go deep, to connect authentically, to engage with what's real and meaningful. When you're forced to operate at surface level for extended periods, it feels like being slowly suffocated. This calibration for depth also means you can sense when someone is ready for a more meaningful conversation. You pick up on the signals that others miss, the slight pause that indicates someone wants to say more, the look that suggests they're processing something complex, the energy shift that shows they're moving from performance to authenticity. You know how to create space for depth without forcing it. But this same sensitivity can be overwhelming in certain environments. Crowded spaces where everyone is performing, networking events where authenticity is seen as unprofessional, social gatherings where the entire focus is on maintaining appearances. These environments can feel toxic to your nervous system, not because the people are bad, but because the energy is completely misaligned with your natural frequency. You might have noticed that you need significant recovery time after social events, even ones you enjoyed. This isn't standard introversion. It's the exhaustion that comes from operating in an energetic frequency that doesn't match your natural state. It's like a musician who's been forced to play out of tune for hours. Technically possible, but extremely draining. Understanding your energetic impact on others and their impact on you is crucial for managing your social energy effectively. You need to learn to recognize which environments and people drain you versus which ones nourish you. You need to develop strategies for protecting your energy while still remaining open to genuine connection. Some 1%ers become social hermits because they can't figure out how to manage these energy dynamics. Others become people pleasers, constantly trying to dim their natural intensity to make others comfortable. Neither approach is healthy or sustainable. The goal is to learn to honor your authentic frequency while developing skills for navigating different social environments without compromising your essential self. Now we're going to explore one of the most psychologically fascinating aspects of the 1% experience, your tendency to activate what Jung called the shadow in others. This is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of your archetypal pattern, and understanding it is crucial for making sense of many of your social experiences. In your presence, people may laugh too loudly, defend things they don't believe, become unusually aggressive or defensive, or simply vanish from your life altogether. They might accuse you of being judgmental when you haven't said a word of criticism. They might feel exposed when you haven't asked them any probing questions. They might become hostile when you've been nothing but kind and accepting. This isn't random. This isn't about their personal psychology or individual quirks. This is Jung's shadow activation happening in real time, and you're the catalyst. Here's how it works. Every person carries what Jung called a shadow, the parts of themselves they've rejected, denied, or haven't integrated. These might be negative qualities they refuse to acknowledge, positive qualities they don't believe they deserve, or simply authentic aspects of themselves that don't fit their chosen persona. Your presence, operating from a place of integrated authenticity, acts like a psychological mirror that reveals where others are not aligned with their own truth. You don't confront them about their contradictions. You don't point out their inconsistencies. You simply exist as a living example of coherence, and that coherence highlights the dissonance in others' energy. It's like a tuning fork that makes other instruments realize they're out of tune. When someone is living in contradiction, saying one thing but feeling another, presenting one image while hiding another truth, performing values they don't actually hold, your presence makes that contradiction more difficult to maintain. Jung called this psychic dissonance. Your steady, authentic frequency reveals the instability in others' energy patterns, and the human psyche doesn't like dissonance. When confronted with it, people typically respond in one of three ways. First, they might try to match your frequency, which requires a level of vulnerability and self-honesty they might not be ready for. This can lead to sudden, intense connections where someone opens up to you completely, shares their deepest secrets, or has breakthrough moments of self-awareness in your presence. Second, they might attack your frequency, projecting onto you all the qualities they can't accept in themselves. You become cold when they're the ones avoiding emotional depth. You become arrogant when they're the ones struggling with intellectual insecurity. You become intense when they're the ones afraid of genuine presence. These projections aren't about you, they're about their own rejected shadow material. Third, they might simply avoid your frequency altogether, finding reasons to limit contact, making excuses to leave conversations early, or gradually fading from your life without explanation. This isn't personal rejection, it's self-protection from an energy that requires more authenticity than they're prepared to offer. Let's pause here for a moment of radical honesty. Think about the people who have gradually disappeared from your life without explanation, who seem to enjoy your company, but then slowly pulled away. If this pattern sounds familiar, if you've experienced people backing away from your energy without clear reason, comment below with "shadow activated." This is one of the most common experiences for our archetype, and you're not imagining it. Understanding shadow activation helps explain why you might feel like you're constantly being misunderstood or misinterpreted. People aren't responding to who you actually are. They're responding to what your authenticity stirs up in their unconscious. Their reactions tell you more about their internal state than about your behavior. This dynamic can be particularly challenging in professional environments. Your natural authenticity might be interpreted as lack of team spirit. Your depth might be seen as negativity. Your refusal to engage in office politics might be viewed as antisocial behavior. You're not doing anything wrong. You're simply operating from an archetypal template that doesn't fit standard corporate personas. In romantic relationships, shadow activation can create intense attraction, followed by intense resistance. Partners might be initially drawn to your authenticity, depth, and genuine presence. But as the relationship deepens, they realize that being with you requires them to be more honest with themselves than they're comfortable being. They might start trying to change you, to make you more normal, to dim your intensity so they don't have to face their own shadows. The key to managing shadow activation is understanding that it's not your fault and it's not something you need to fix. You can't control how others respond to your authenticity. You can only control how you respond to their responses. Learning to recognize shadow activation when it happens helps you avoid taking others' projections personally. You also need to develop discernment about which relationships can handle the depth you naturally bring, and which ones can't. Not everyone is ready for the level of authenticity you offer, and that's okay. Your job isn't to make others comfortable with their shadows. It's to remain true to your own authentic frequency, while protecting yourself from others' unconscious projections. Shadow activation also works in reverse. When you encounter someone else who operates from genuine authenticity, you might find your own shadows being activated. You might feel suddenly defensive, competitive, or critical. Recognizing this pattern in yourself helps you use these encounters as opportunities for growth rather than sources of conflict. The ultimate goal isn't to avoid activating others' shadows. That would require you to become false, which goes against your archetypal nature. The goal is to understand the mechanism so you can navigate it consciously, with compassion for both yourself and others who are struggling with their own integration process. Let's dive deep into one of the most painful aspects of the 1% experience: relationships. You attract people who crave your stillness, your depth, your authentic presence, until they realize it won't change for them. They love the mystery, not the truth. They want to access your gifts without reciprocating them. They want you to be their sanctuary, while they continue living in their chaos. This creates what I call the tragedy of half-love. People fall in love with your energy, with the way you make them feel, with the safety and depth your presence provides. But they want to access these gifts without being willing to match them. They want you to understand them without being willing to truly understand you. They want you to accept their complexity while expecting you to be simple and predictable. When you don't conform to their expectations, when you don't soften your edges to make them more comfortable, when you continue to be authentically yourself rather than their idealized version of you, they either try to reshape you or leave confused and often angry. They might say things like, "You've changed," or "You're not who I thought you were." But you haven't changed. They've simply realized that you won't change for them. In romantic relationships, this pattern can be particularly devastating. You might attract partners who are initially fascinated by your depth, your wisdom, your ability to see through surface-level illusions. They love that you don't play games, that you communicate directly, that you bring authenticity to every interaction. But as the relationship deepens, they begin to realize what being with someone like you actually requires. It requires them to be honest about their own contradictions. It requires them to face aspects of themselves they've been avoiding. It requires them to give up the comfortable illusions they've been living in. It requires them to match your level of authenticity, and most people aren't prepared for that level of self-examination. So they start trying to change you. They want you to be a little less intense, a little more normal, a little more willing to participate in the social performances they find comfortable. They want you to laugh at things you don't find funny, to get excited about things that seem meaningless to you, to pretend not to see the things you naturally observe. When you resist these attempts to modify your authentic self, conflict arises. They might accuse you of being stubborn, inflexible, or unwilling to compromise. But what they're really asking you to compromise is your essential nature. They want you to be less yourself so they can be more comfortable being less themselves. This dynamic isn't limited to romantic relationships. It plays out in friendships, family relationships, and professional connections as well. People are drawn to your authenticity until they realize that being close to you requires them to be more authentic too. Then they either rise to meet that challenge or try to pull you down to their comfort level. The tragedy is that these people often genuinely care about you. They're not intentionally trying to harm you or change you. They simply don't understand that what they love about you, your depth, your authenticity, your genuine presence, can't be separated from the qualities they find challenging: your refusal to perform, your inability to be false, your natural inclination toward truth. They want the benefits of being close to someone real without the vulnerability of being real themselves. They want to be inspired by your authenticity without having to examine their own authenticity. They want to feel safe in your presence without creating the same safety for you. Think about your closest relationships right now. How many of those people have tried to change fundamental aspects of who you are? How many have asked you to be less intense or more normal? If this pattern sounds familiar, comment with "been there." Let's acknowledge how common this experience is. This pattern can lead to a unique form of relationship trauma for 1%ers. You learn to anticipate that people will eventually try to change you. You develop a hypervigilance around the first signs that someone wants you to be different than you are. You might start holding back parts of yourself to avoid triggering the inevitable conflict. But holding back your authenticity is like holding your breath. You can do it for a while, but eventually you'll need to exhale. And when you do, the same conflicts arise anyway. The only difference is that you've wasted time and energy trying to be someone you're not. The solution isn't to become less authentic to attract more compatible partners. The solution is to develop better discernment about which people are capable of genuine relationship and which ones are looking for something you can't and shouldn't provide. People who are ready for real relationship with a 1%er will be doing their own inner work. They'll have their own relationship with authenticity. They'll be attracted to your depth because they have depth of their own, not because they want to borrow yours. They'll appreciate your refusal to perform because they're tired of performing too. These relationships are rare, but they're profound when they occur. When you find someone who can match your authenticity, who doesn't try to change your essential nature, who appreciates your depth without trying to exploit it, the connection is unlike anything most people ever experience. The key is learning to wait for these rare connections rather than settling for half-love. It's learning to value your own authenticity enough to protect it from those who would diminish it. It's learning to recognize the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you can do for them. This doesn't mean becoming closed off or cynical about relationships. It means developing the discernment to recognize which connections have the potential for real depth and which ones are asking you to compromise your essential self. It means being willing to be alone rather than being with someone who requires you to be false. The workplace presents unique challenges for the 1%. Most professional environments are built on performance, hierarchy, politics, and collective pretense, all things that go against your archetypal grain. You're wired for authenticity, depth, meaningful work, and genuine connection. Corporate culture often demands the opposite. Let's start with the most common challenge: the expectation to play the game. Office politics, networking events, team-building exercises, performance reviews. These systems assume that everyone is willing and able to present curated versions of themselves for professional advancement, but your authenticity makes it difficult to participate in these rituals without feeling like you're betraying your essential nature. You might find yourself in meetings where everyone is nodding along with decisions they privately disagree with, and you're the only one asking the uncomfortable questions. You might be in workplace social events where everyone is performing enthusiasm for company initiatives they don't actually support, and you're struggling to muster fake excitement. You might be in performance reviews where you're expected to sell yourself using language that feels artificial and self-aggrandizing. This isn't because you're negative or uncooperative. It's because your nervous system is calibrated for truth, and professional environments often run on collectively agreed-upon fictions. When everyone is expected to pretend that layoffs are right-sizing, that overwork is opportunity, that toxic management is strong leadership, your authenticity makes it almost impossible to participate in these collective delusions. You might be labeled as not a team player when you refuse to enthusiastically support initiatives you can see are flawed. You might be seen as lacking ambition when you don't want to climb a corporate ladder that requires you to compromise your values at every rung. You might be considered difficult when you ask direct questions that expose uncomfortable truths others prefer to ignore. The challenge is that your natural gifts, your ability to see patterns, your deep thinking, your authentic communication style, your capacity for meaningful work, often aren't valued in environments that prioritize speed over depth, performance over authenticity, compliance over creativity. Many 1%ers find themselves in a professional catch-22. Jobs that would utilize their natural talents, counseling, coaching, creative work, research, spiritual guidance, often don't provide the financial stability they need. Meanwhile, jobs that provide financial security often require them to suppress their authentic nature for 8 hours a day. This creates a unique form of career exhaustion. It's not just the normal tiredness that comes from working. It's the deep fatigue that comes from spending your days being someone you're not. It's the emotional drain of constantly translating your thoughts into appropriate corporate language. It's the spiritual depletion that comes from doing work that feels meaningless or even harmful. You might find yourself successful in traditional careers, but feeling empty despite external achievements. You climb the ladder, earn the promotions, receive the recognition, but none of it feels satisfying because it's all based on a performance rather than your authentic self. Some 1%ers become entrepreneurs, seeking the freedom to work authentically. But even entrepreneurship presents challenges when your natural depth and authenticity don't translate easily into marketing, sales, and business development. How do you promote yourself when self-promotion feels artificial? How do you network when networking events feel like exercises in mutual manipulation? The key to professional satisfaction for the 1% is finding ways to bring your authentic gifts into your work, regardless of the environment. This might mean seeking roles where your depth and insight are valued, even within traditional organizations, finding ways to mentor others or provide guidance, even if it's not in your job description, creating projects or initiatives that allow you to work from your authentic strengths, building relationships with colleagues who appreciate your genuine approach, setting boundaries that protect your authentic self while still meeting professional obligations. Quick question. Have you ever been told you're too intense for a workplace, or that you need to be more of a team player? If you've struggled with fitting your authentic self into professional environments, comment with "square peg, round hole." Let's acknowledge how common this challenge is. Another major challenge for 1%ers in professional settings is the management of your natural empathy and perceptiveness. You can sense when colleagues are struggling, when management decisions will have negative consequences, when team dynamics are unhealthy. But speaking up about these observations often isn't welcome in environments that prefer to maintain comfortable illusions. You might find yourself carrying emotional burdens that aren't technically your responsibility, worrying about the impact of layoffs on co-workers, feeling responsible for team morale, sensing the stress and dysfunction around you, and wanting to help heal it. This can lead to a form of workplace burnout that has nothing to do with your actual job duties and everything to do with your sensitive nature. Learning to manage your professional energy means developing skills that don't come naturally to your archetype: political awareness, strategic communication, selective authenticity. It means learning when to speak up and when to stay quiet, when to offer your insights and when to keep them to yourself, when to invest your energy in trying to create change, and when to protect yourself from systems that aren't ready for what you offer. The goal isn't to become inauthentic in professional settings, but to become strategically authentic. It's learning to express your truth in ways that can be heard and received, rather than ways that trigger defensive responses. It's finding the balance between honoring your authentic nature and functioning effectively within systems that weren't designed for your particular gifts. Some 1%ers eventually find or create work environments that align with their values and utilize their natural talents. Others learn to find meaning and authenticity outside of work, while maintaining professional personas that allow them to earn a living. There's no right answer, only the path that feels most aligned with your particular circumstances and values. The important thing is recognizing that the challenges you face in professional environments aren't personal failures or character flaws. They're the natural result of trying to fit an authentic, depth-oriented archetype into systems designed for performance and surface-level interaction. Understanding this can help you develop strategies that honor both your authentic nature and your practical needs. Let's explore one of the most mysterious aspects of the 1% experience, what many call having an ancient soul. Your soul didn't start with childhood. It started mid-sentence, as if you were born already knowing things you shouldn't know, understanding patterns you've never encountered, carrying wisdom that doesn't match your chronological age. This isn't about past lives or reincarnation, though some 1%ers find those concepts helpful for understanding their experience. This is about something Jung recognized in certain individuals, an archetypal connection to what he called the collective unconscious, the deeper layer of human experience that contains universal patterns, ancient wisdom, and timeless truths. While other children were learning the rules of the world, you were already questioning them. While they were trying to fit in, you were observing the cost of fitting in. While they were absorbing social conditioning, you were somehow immune to much of it, as if you had some kind of natural resistance to cultural programming. You've always sensed a rhythm others don't hear, a deeper pulse beneath the surface noise of daily life. It's like having a tuning fork buried in your psyche that resonates with frequencies most people can't detect. This gives you access to information and insights that don't come from books, experience, or education. They seem to arise from some deeper source of knowing. This ancient quality manifests in various ways. You might have always been drawn to wisdom traditions, spiritual practices, or philosophical questions that seem too complex for your age. You might have found yourself naturally understanding concepts that others struggle to grasp. You might have experienced moments of profound knowing, sudden insights about life, death, meaning, purpose, that seem to come from nowhere. Many 1%ers report having had cosmic experiences as children, moments of expanded awareness where they felt connected to something vast and timeless. These weren't drug-induced or trauma-related experiences, but natural expansions of consciousness that gave them glimpses of realities beyond ordinary perception. This ancient quality also means you've always been aware of the temporary nature of most human concerns. While others get caught up in drama, competition, social status, material acquisition, you've had a natural perspective that sees these things as temporary games rather than ultimate realities. This perspective can be incredibly valuable, but it can also create a sense of alienation from peers who are fully invested in these temporal concerns. You don't chase trends because you can see their temporary nature. You don't get caught up in social hierarchies because you understand their artificial construction. You don't pursue status symbols because you know they don't address the deeper questions of meaning and purpose that have always been primary for you. This ancient wisdom comes with both gifts and burdens. The gift is access to depth, meaning, and perspective that can serve as a compass through life's challenges. You have an internal reference point for what matters and what doesn't, that remains stable regardless of external circumstances. You have access to a kind of inner knowing that can guide decisions and provide comfort during difficult times. The burden is the loneliness that comes from operating on a different timeline than most of your peers. You're surrounded by people who are just beginning to ask questions you started asking decades ago. They're excited about discoveries you made in childhood, They're fighting battles you resolved internally long ago. Let's check something. Have you ever had someone significantly older than you comment that you seem like an old soul? Or have you found yourself naturally gravitating toward older, wiser people rather than peers your own age? If this resonates, comment with "Born Knowing." Let's see how many ancient souls are watching. This temporal displacement can create challenges in relationships and social connections. While others your age are focused on typical developmental tasks, career building, family creation, social positioning, you might be drawn to questions of meaning, purpose, spiritual development, and authentic living that typically don't become central until much later in life. You might find yourself more comfortable in conversations with people decades older than you, not because you're trying to be mature or sophisticated, but because they're finally asking the questions that have always been central to your experience. Meanwhile, interactions with age-appropriate peers might feel shallow or frustrating because they're still working through issues you processed long ago. The ancient soul phenomenon also means you've likely experienced what Jung called archetypal dreams throughout your life. Dreams that seem to contain wisdom, symbols, and meanings that your conscious mind couldn't have created. These dreams often provide guidance, insight or healing that feels like it's coming from a source much older and wiser than your personal consciousness. Many 1%ers find that their ancient soul quality becomes more pronounced as they age. While others might struggle with midlife crises or spiritual emergencies, you might find that the wisdom you've always carried becomes more accessible and useful. The questions you've been asking your whole life start to yield answers. The depth you've always felt begins to make more sense in the context of a life lived authentically. But the ancient soul phenomenon also means you carry a unique form of responsibility. You have access to wisdom and perspective that others need, but sharing it effectively requires tremendous skill and sensitivity. Speaking your truth too directly can overwhelm or threaten those who aren't ready for it. Keeping it to yourself can feel like withholding something valuable that could help others. Learning to honor your ancient soul quality means accepting that you operate on a different developmental timeline than most people. It means finding ways to share your wisdom appropriately rather than feeling frustrated that others don't naturally have access to what seems obvious to you. And it means recognizing that your particular form of depth and knowing is a gift to be stewarded carefully, not a burden to be ashamed of. You exist in two planes simultaneously, and this dual existence is one of the most defining characteristics of the 1% experience. You show up to work, pay bills, engage in small talk, nod appropriately at social gatherings, and fulfill your practical responsibilities. But internally you live in metaphors, in memory and meaning, in a rich inner landscape that most people around you don't even know exists. This dual citizenship between the practical world and the archetypal world is both exhausting and extraordinary. You're constantly translating between two different languages, the language of daily life and the language of the soul. Most people are fluent in only one. They either live entirely in the practical realm, focused on tasks and achievements and social positioning, or they live entirely in the abstract realm, disconnected from practical reality and unable to function in the everyday world. But you bridge these worlds naturally. You can discuss quarterly reports and ancient wisdom in the same conversation. You can be fully present for someone's practical problems while simultaneously seeing the archetypal patterns they're working through. You can engage with the surface level of life while remaining rooted in its deeper meanings. Jung called people like you cultural bridges. You help others access parts of themselves they've forgotten or never knew existed. You serve as translators between different levels of reality, different depths of experience, different dimensions of human existence. But this bridging function comes with a significant cost. You're often serving as a translator between worlds, which means you rarely get to fully rest in either one. The practical world feels too shallow for your soul. All those conversations about weather and sports and consumer choices when you're internally processing questions of meaning, purpose, and authentic existence. The archetypal world feels too abstract for your daily life. All that depth and symbolism and cosmic awareness when you still need to grocery shop and pay taxes and navigate traffic. You live in the tension between these realms, which is profoundly uncomfortable but also profoundly valuable. You help others remember that both dimensions are real and both are necessary. You demonstrate that it's possible to be deeply spiritual while remaining practically functional, to be mystically inclined while still paying attention to mundane responsibilities. This dual consciousness creates unique challenges in relationships. When someone asks how your day was, do you talk about the meetings you attended and the errands you ran, or do you talk about the profound realization you had about the nature of authenticity while waiting in line at the grocery store? Most people want the surface-level update, but that's not where you actually live. You might find yourself constantly choosing between authentic sharing and social appropriateness. If you share what's really going on in your inner world, you risk overwhelming people or being seen as strange. If you stick to surface-level sharing, you feel like you're lying about your actual experience of life. Here's a question that might resonate. When someone asks what you're thinking about, do you often find yourself choosing between the real answer and the socially acceptable answer? If you regularly have to translate your inner experience into something others can handle, comment with, "Lost in translation." This is such a common experience for our archetype. The bridging function also means you often find yourself serving as an interpreter for others who are having their own encounters with depth or meaning, but don't have the language or framework to understand what's happening to them. Someone might come to you after a profound dream, a mystical experience, a moment of spiritual insight, or a psychological breakthrough, seeking help, understanding what they've encountered. You naturally understand these experiences because you live in the realm where they occur. You can help others integrate their encounters with depth, provide context for their spiritual experiences, offer language for their psychological insights. But this interpreting role can be draining, especially when people want you to explain their experiences without being willing to do the inner work necessary to understand them themselves. The dual consciousness also manifests in your relationship with time. While living in the practical world, you're aware of schedules, deadlines, appointments, and the linear progression of daily life. But internally, you often experience time differently, moments of expanded awareness where past, present, and future seem to merge, periods of deep reflection where hours pass unnoticed, experiences of timeless presence that feel more real than clock time. This temporal flexibility can be disorienting but also incredibly valuable. You have access to perspective that transcends immediate circumstances. You can see current challenges in the context of larger patterns and longer time frames. You can remain centered during chaos because you're connected to something that exists outside of temporary turbulence. The bridging function extends to your role in groups and communities. You often find yourself naturally facilitating deeper conversations, asking the questions others are afraid to ask, creating space for authenticity in environments that typically operate on surface levels. People sense that you can handle depth, so they bring their complex questions and difficult emotions to you. But this bridging role requires tremendous energy and skill. You need to learn how to create appropriate containers for depth, how to invite others into meaningful territory without overwhelming them, how to honor both the practical and archetypal dimensions of experience without getting lost in either one. The goal isn't to choose one world over the other, but to develop greater fluency in moving between them. It's learning to be fully present in practical matters when that's what's required, while maintaining connection to your deeper knowing. It's learning to access your archetypal wisdom when that's what's needed, while staying grounded in practical reality. This dual consciousness is one of your greatest gifts to the world, but it requires careful stewardship. You're helping to weave together dimensions of experience that have been artificially separated in modern culture. You're demonstrating that it's possible to be both mystical and practical, both spiritually oriented and functionally effective. This integration is desperately needed in a world that has lost touch with its deeper dimensions. To be aligned inside and out is to be inconvenient. To stay true when the world wants a softer, more palatable version of you is an act of revolution. That weight you feel, that pressure in your chest, that sense of carrying something heavy that others don't seem to notice, that's not depression, that's not anxiety, that's the gravity of truth. Living with coherence means you can't compartmentalize the way others do. You can't be one person at work, another person with friends, and a third person at home. You can't separate your values from your actions, your inner truth from your outer expression, your spiritual beliefs from your daily choices. Your energy signature remains consistent, because it's rooted in something deeper than social roles or external expectations. This consistency is both your strength and your challenge. It means people know what to expect from you. They know you'll be genuine, that your words will match your actions, that you won't pretend to feel something you don't feel. But it also means you can't adapt to situations the way others do. You can't perform enthusiasm for things that feel meaningless to you. You can't fake agreement with ideas you find harmful. You can't pretend to be smaller than you are just to make others comfortable. The weight of this coherence can feel overwhelming sometimes. You might look at others who seem to navigate social and professional situations with ease, who can slip in and out of different personas like changing clothes, who can laugh at jokes they don't find funny and agree with opinions they don't share, and wonder if there's something wrong with you. Why can't you just go along to get along? Why does everything have to be so meaningful? Why can't you just perform the expected roles without it feeling like you're betraying your soul? There's nothing wrong with you. You're operating from a different archetypal template. You're wired for truth rather than adaptation. And while this makes certain aspects of life more challenging, it also makes your life more meaningful, more integrated, more authentic. The weight of coherence comes from several sources. First, there's the energy required to remain true to yourself in a world that constantly pressures you to be different. Every social interaction where you choose authenticity over appropriateness requires conscious effort. Every professional situation where you maintain your values rather than compromising for advantage takes internal strength. Every relationship where you remain yourself rather than becoming what others want requires courage. Second, there's the emotional burden of seeing clearly in a world that runs on collective illusion. When you can see through the social theater, the political manipulation, the commercial deception, the spiritual bypassing that others accept without question, you carry the weight of that awareness. You can't unsee what you've seen, you can't unknow what you know, and that knowledge can feel isolating and heavy. Third, there's the responsibility that comes with being a keeper of authenticity. When others can sense your coherence, they often project onto you the role of truth teller, wisdom keeper, moral compass. They expect you to always know the right thing to do, to always have insight into complex situations, to always remain stable when they're in chaos. This projection of superhuman consistency can feel crushing. Let's acknowledge something here. How often do people come to you expecting you to have answers, to be their source of stability, to remain calm and wise while they're falling apart? If you've become the unofficial counselor for others while rarely receiving the same support yourself, comment with, "Holding it all." Let's recognize this common burden. The weight of coherence also comes from the energy drain of living authentically in inauthentic environments. When you're in situations that require you to operate against your natural grain, performing enthusiasm you don't feel, engaging in conversations that feel meaningless, participating in activities that contradict your values, you experience a form of spiritual friction that's physically and emotionally exhausting. Many 1%ers develop what might be called coherence fatigue, the deep tiredness that comes from constantly having to choose between authenticity and social acceptance, between being true to yourself and meeting others' expectations. This isn't ordinary tiredness that can be fixed with rest. It's soul-level exhaustion that comes from living out of alignment with environments and relationships that require you to be false. But here's what's important to understand. This weight is not a pathology. It's not something to be cured or fixed or medicated away. It's the natural result of carrying a frequency that's rare in the current world. It's the gravitational pull of living according to deeper laws than social convenience. The weight of coherence is also a form of spiritual service. By remaining authentic in inauthentic environments, by refusing to perform personas that contradict your truth, by insisting on depth in a superficial world, you're holding space for authenticity itself. You're demonstrating that it's possible to live differently. You're proving that coherence is achievable, even when it's difficult. This doesn't mean you should martyr yourself for the sake of authenticity. It doesn't mean you should sacrifice your well-being to prove a point about living genuinely. But it does mean recognizing that the weight you carry serves a purpose larger than your individual comfort. Learning to manage the weight of coherence involves several strategies. First, you need to find environments and relationships where your authenticity is welcomed rather than merely tolerated. These spaces allow you to rest in your natural state, rather than constantly working to maintain it against resistance. Second, you need to develop practices that help you process and release the accumulated weight of living authentically in an inauthentic world. This might include meditation, journaling, time in nature, creative expression, or other activities that help you discharge the energy buildup that comes from constant coherence maintenance. Third, you need to find others who understand the weight you carry. Connection with other one-percenters, even if it's rare, can provide the recognition and validation that helps make the weight bearable. When someone else understands the cost of living authentically, you don't feel so alone in carrying it. The goal isn't to eliminate the weight of coherence. That would require you to become inauthentic, which goes against your essential nature. The goal is to develop the strength and support systems necessary to carry that weight gracefully, knowing that it serves a purpose both for your own development and for the world's need for authentic examples. Society thrives on performances, masks repetition, scripts that everyone has memorized but no one admits they're reading from. You were not built for applause, you were built for presence, and that fundamental difference in design creates most of the challenges you face in navigating the modern world. Performance-based living is everywhere. Social media profiles that showcase curated versions of people's lives, professional environments that reward the appearance of competence over actual competence, social interactions that prioritize entertainment over connection, relationships that focus on meeting each other's needs rather than seeing each other's truth. You don't perform well in these environments, not because you're broken, but because your nervous system responds to inauthenticity like poison. When you're required to be performative, your energy literally starts to shut down. You feel drained, disconnected, sometimes physically ill. This isn't social anxiety or introversion. It's your authentic self protecting itself from environments that would damage your essential nature. Presence is something entirely different from performance. Performance is about creating an effect, managing an impression, controlling how others perceive you. Presence is about being fully here, completely available, genuinely yourself in this moment. Performance requires you to monitor and adjust your behavior constantly. Presence allows you to simply be. When you operate from presence rather than performance, people feel it immediately. They might not be able to name what's different about you, but they sense that you're actually here with them rather than managing the interaction. They feel seen, heard, met at a level that's rare in their experience. This is why people are drawn to you, even when they can't explain why. But presence in a performance-based world can feel like speaking a foreign language. Others don't always know how to respond to genuine availability. They might interpret your presence as intensity, your authenticity as judgment, your depth as heaviness. They're used to interacting with personas, not with people. Think about your last social gathering. Were you performing, monitoring your responses, managing impressions, playing a role? Or were you present, simply being yourself and letting the interaction unfold naturally? If you find yourself exhausted after social events where you had to perform, comment with presence over performance. Let's acknowledge this fundamental difference in how we engage. The shift from performance to presence isn't just about social interactions. It affects every area of life. In professional settings, presence means bringing your authentic skills and perspectives rather than trying to project competence you don't feel. In relationships, presence means showing up as yourself rather than as who you think the other person wants you to be. In creative endeavors, presence means expressing what's actually moving through you rather than what you think will be well received. This shift requires unlearning much of what you've been taught about how to be successful in the world. Performance-based thinking tells you to identify what others want and give it to them. Presence-based living asks you to identify what's authentic for you and express that, trusting that the right connections and opportunities will emerge from that authenticity. The challenge is that presence-based living often doesn't produce immediate external rewards. Performance can get you quick approval, social acceptance, professional advancement. Presence builds something deeper but slower: genuine relationships, authentic success, meaningful impact. In a world focused on instant gratification and external validation, Choosing presence over performance requires tremendous faith in a different set of values. Many 1%ers go through periods of trying to master performance-based living. You might spend years learning to network effectively, to present yourself professionally, to say the right things in social situations. And you might achieve external success through these efforts. But the cost is usually a sense of disconnection from your authentic self and exhaustion from constantly managing your image. The return to presence often happens through crisis or burnout. You reach a point where you simply can't maintain the performance anymore. The energy required to be someone you're not becomes unsustainable. This crisis, while difficult, often becomes the doorway back to your authentic way of being. Presence-based living doesn't mean being inappropriately authentic, sharing everything you think and feel without consideration for context or impact. It means being genuinely yourself within appropriate boundaries. It means expressing your truth in ways that can be received, rather than ways that create unnecessary conflict or confusion. It also doesn't mean rejecting all social conventions or professional requirements. It means finding ways to meet necessary external requirements while remaining internally authentic. It means learning to navigate performance-based environments without losing your connection to presence. The development of presence as your primary mode of being is a lifelong practice. It requires constantly choosing authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, depth over surface-level acceptance. But the rewards are profound. Relationships based on genuine connection rather than mutual performance. Work that utilizes your authentic gifts rather than requiring you to pretend to be someone else. And a sense of internal coherence that comes from living in alignment with your true nature. Presence is also a gift you give to others. In a world where most people are performing some version of themselves, encountering someone who is genuinely present can be transformative. Your willingness to be real gives others permission to be real. Your refusal to perform authenticity demonstrates that authenticity is actually possible. The goal isn't to convince others to abandon performance-based living. That's their choice to make. The goal is to develop such a strong foundation in presence-based living that you can maintain your authenticity regardless of what others are doing around you. It's learning to be genuinely yourself even in environments that don't support or understand that authenticity. One of the most challenging aspects of the 1% experience is the rarity of finding others who truly understand your way of being. You're surrounded by people, but genuine connection feels elusive. You have relationships, but they often feel like you're speaking different languages. You're part of communities, but you remain fundamentally alone in your deeper experience. This isn't about being antisocial or thinking you're better than others. It's about the mathematical reality of being part of a small minority. If only 1% of people operate from your archetypal template, then 99% of your potential connections won't naturally understand your depth, your authenticity, your refusal to perform, your ancient soul quality, your sensitivity to energy and truth. But here's what's crucial to understand. Your tribe exists. They're rare, scattered, often hidden behind the same social masks you've learned to wear for survival. But they're out there, living their own version of the 1% experience, feeling the same sense of isolation you feel, looking for the same depth of connection you're seeking. Finding your tribe isn't about finding people who are exactly like you. It's about finding people who operate from the same core values. Authenticity over performance, depth over surface, truth over comfort, meaning over convention. These people might express these values in completely different ways than you do, but they share the fundamental commitment to living genuinely rather than performing socially. Your tribe might include the artist who refuses to compromise their vision for commercial success, even though it means financial struggle. The therapist who does deep transformational work rather than just managing symptoms. The teacher who prioritizes student growth over test scores. The business person who insists on ethical practices even when it's not profitable. The parent who raises their children to think critically rather than conform blindly. Think about the people in your life right now. Who are the ones you can be completely authentic with? Who accepts your depth, your intensity, your refusal to perform? If you can count these people on one hand, you're not alone. Comment with, "Still searching," if you haven't found your full tribe yet, or found some if you've found a few genuine connections. The challenge in finding your tribe is that these people often don't advertise their authenticity. In a performance-based world, genuine people learn to hide their depth until they feel safe revealing it. They've learned, just like you have, that being too real too quickly can overwhelm others or create unwanted projections. So your tribe members might initially appear to be just like everyone else. They've learned to speak the social language, to navigate professional environments, to maintain appropriate boundaries. But underneath that surface competence, they carry the same hunger for authentic connection, the same sensitivity to truth and falsehood, the same exhaustion from living in a performative world. Recognition often happens through subtle signals. Someone might make a comment that reveals deeper thinking. They might ask questions that go beyond surface level. They might respond to your authenticity with relief rather than discomfort. They might share something real about their experience rather than just maintaining social pleasantries. Building connection with potential tribe members requires patience and skill. You can't overwhelm them with your full depth immediately. That would trigger the same defensive responses you've learned to expect from others. Instead, you need to create gradual invitations to deeper connection, testing whether they're ready and able to meet you at increasing levels of authenticity. This process can be frustrating because it requires you to moderate your natural inclination toward immediate depth. But it's necessary because even people who are capable of authentic connection need time to assess whether you're safe to be real with. They've been hurt by sharing too much with the wrong people, just like you have. Your tribe might not all know each other. You might have one friend who understands your spiritual seeking, another who gets your professional challenges, a family member who appreciates your depth, a colleague who shares your values. The goal isn't necessarily to find one group that meets all your needs, but to build a network of authentic connections that collectively provide the understanding and support you need. Online communities can be valuable for finding tribe members, especially for 1%ers who live in areas where authentic people are particularly rare. The internet allows you to connect with others who share your values and interests, regardless of geographical proximity. But online connections, while valuable, can't completely replace in-person relationships with people who can be present with your full energy. Building your tribe also requires you to be the kind of person others would want in their tribe. This means developing the skills of authentic relationship, being genuinely interested in others' depth, creating safe space for people to be real, offering support without trying to fix or change others, maintaining appropriate boundaries while remaining genuinely available. Some 1%ers make the mistake of waiting for their tribe to find them rather than actively seeking authentic connections. While there's something to be said for allowing natural connections to unfold, you also need to put yourself in environments where authentic people are more likely to gather. This might mean spiritual communities, personal growth workshops, creative endeavors, volunteer work for causes you care about, or professional organizations focused on meaningful work. The process of finding your tribe is often a journey of becoming more authentically yourself. As you stop hiding your depth, stop performing normalcy, stop trying to fit into groups that don't appreciate your genuine nature, you become more visible to others who are looking for the same authenticity you seek. Remember that your tribe doesn't have to be large. Even 1 or 2 people who truly understand and appreciate your authentic self can transform your experience of life. Quality of connection matters far more than quantity. It's better to have one genuine relationship than dozens of superficial ones. We've explored what it means to be part of the 1%, the costs and gifts of this archetypal pattern, the challenges and opportunities it presents. Now comes the crucial question. How do you actually live authentically in a world that seems designed for performance, surface-level interaction, and collective illusion? The first principle is acceptance, not resignation, but genuine acceptance of what is. You cannot change the fact that most people operate differently than you do. You cannot force others to value depth over surface, authenticity over performance, truth over comfort. You cannot make the world more authentic by sheer force of will or moral superiority. What you can do is accept that you're operating from a minority archetype in a world primarily designed for majority patterns. This acceptance allows you to stop fighting reality and start working skillfully within it. It allows you to develop strategies for thriving rather than just surviving. The second principle is discernment, learning to recognize which environments, relationships, and opportunities align with your authentic nature, and which ones require you to compromise your essential self. Not all compromises are created equal. Some adaptations allow you to function in the world while maintaining your core integrity. Others require you to betray fundamental aspects of who you are. Developing discernment means learning to assess situations quickly and accurately. Which job opportunity will utilize your authentic gifts versus which one will require you to perform a role that drains your soul? Which social invitation will allow for genuine connection versus which one will demand hours of exhausting performance? Which relationship has the potential for real depth versus which one wants to keep you in a supporting role for their drama? The third principle is boundaries, learning to protect your authentic energy while remaining open to genuine connection. This is perhaps the most difficult skill for 1%ers to develop because your natural inclination is toward openness, empathy, and service to others. But without boundaries, you become a dumping ground for others' emotional chaos, a constant source of wisdom and stability for people who aren't willing to do their own inner work. Healthy boundaries for 1%ers look different than they do for others. Your boundaries aren't about becoming cold or closed off. They're about becoming selective. You learn to invest your energy in relationships and situations that can reciprocate your depth rather than constantly giving to people who only take. You learn to share your wisdom with those who are ready to receive and use it rather than casting pearls before swine. The fourth principle is strategic authenticity, learning to express your truth in ways that can be heard and received rather than ways that trigger defensive responses or create unnecessary conflict. This isn't about being false. It's about being skillfully genuine. It's learning to meet people where they are while remaining true to where you are. Strategic authenticity might mean sharing your deeper insights gradually, rather than overwhelming someone with your full perspective immediately. It might mean using language that bridges different levels of understanding, rather than speaking only from your archetypal depth. It might mean choosing when to speak your truth and when to remain quietly authentic without verbal expression. Here's a practical question. Have you learned to moderate how much depth you share based on who you're talking to? Not being false, but being appropriately authentic. If you've developed this skill of meeting people where they are while staying true to yourself, comment with strategic truth. This is advanced 1%er navigation. The fifth principle is energy management, recognizing that your authentic way of being requires different energy patterns than performance-based living. You need more recovery time after social interactions. You need regular solitude to process and integrate. You need environments that nourish rather than drain your sensitive nervous system. Energy management means learning to say no to invitations, opportunities, and requests that would deplete you without providing meaningful value in return. It means scheduling downtime as rigorously as you schedule commitments. It means creating physical and emotional spaces where you can be completely authentic without any performance requirements. The sixth principle is purpose alignment, finding ways to express your authentic gifts in service of something larger than yourself. When your depth, wisdom, and authenticity are channeled toward meaningful purposes, the challenges of living differently become more bearable because they're serving something important. This might mean finding work that utilizes your natural talents for seeing patterns, facilitating depth, or supporting others' growth. It might mean volunteering for causes that align with your values. It might mean creating art, writing, or other expressions that share your authentic perspective with the world. It might mean being a conscious parent who raises children to think critically and live authentically. The seventh principle is community building, actively creating connections with others who share your values and can appreciate your authentic way of being. This doesn't happen automatically. It requires intentional effort to seek out and nurture relationships with people who operate from similar archetypal patterns. Community building might mean starting or joining groups focused on personal growth, spiritual development, creative expression, or social change. It might mean organizing gatherings where depth and authenticity are explicitly welcomed. It might mean using technology to connect with like-minded individuals across geographical boundaries. The eighth principle is self-compassion, recognizing that living authentically in an inauthentic world is genuinely difficult and giving yourself credit for the courage it requires. Many 1%ers are harder on themselves than they are on others, expecting themselves to navigate impossible situations with perfect grace and endless patience. Self-compassion means acknowledging that you're doing something genuinely challenging every day, simply by refusing to compromise your essential nature. It means recognizing that the loneliness, exhaustion, and frustration you experience are natural responses to being a minority archetype, not personal failures or character flaws. The ninth principle is contribution. Understanding that your authentic way of being serves a function larger than your individual comfort or success. By living genuinely in a world that runs on performance, you're providing an example of what's possible. You're holding space for authenticity itself. You're proving that depth, truth, and genuine presence are achievable, even when they're difficult. This doesn't mean martyring yourself for the sake of authenticity or sacrificing your well-being to prove a point. But it does mean recognizing that your refusal to perform false roles serves the collective evolution of consciousness, even when that service isn't recognized or appreciated. The 10th principle is evolution. Understanding that your authentic expression will continue to deepen and refine throughout your life. You're not trying to achieve some final state of perfect authenticity. You're engaged in an ongoing process of becoming more genuinely yourself, while learning to navigate the world more skillfully. This evolution requires staying curious about your own growth edge, remaining open to feedback from trusted sources, and continuing to develop the skills necessary for authentic living. It means recognizing that mastery of the 1% archetypal pattern is a lifelong journey, not a destination. Living authentically in an inauthentic world isn't about creating a perfect life or finding ideal circumstances. It's about developing the skills, principles, and support systems necessary to remain true to your essential nature while functioning effectively in whatever circumstances you encounter. It's about learning to be genuinely yourself regardless of external conditions. The goal isn't to change the world to match your preferences, but to develop such a strong foundation in authentic living that you can maintain your integrity and contribute your gifts regardless of what's happening around you. This is the ultimate freedom, the ability to be genuinely yourself no matter what. We've traveled deep into the psychology and lived experience of the 1%, those rare individuals who carry what Carl Jung might have called the forgotten archetype. We've explored the birthmark of silence that marks you from childhood, the sacred outsider position you naturally occupy, the ancient soul quality that makes you feel older than your years. We've examined the challenges, the shadow activation you trigger in others, the tragedy of half-love in relationships, the professional difficulties of trying to fit authenticity into performance-based environments. We've looked at the weight of coherence, the exhaustion of bridging two worlds, the loneliness of living genuinely in a world built on collective performance. But we've also discovered the gifts, your natural ability to see through illusion, your capacity for genuine presence, your access to depth and meaning that serves not just yourself, but everyone whose life you touch. We've explored strategies for thriving rather than just surviving with this archetypal pattern. Now comes the most important part, full acceptance and embrace of your frequency. You are not broken, you are not too much, you are not enough. You were never meant to fit into the mainstream patterns because you're here to serve a different function. You're here to hold space for authenticity itself, to demonstrate that depth is possible, to prove that genuine presence is achievable even in artificial environments. Your sensitivity is not weakness, it's sophisticated radar for truth and falsehood. Your depth is not dysfunction, it's access to dimensions of experience that most people have forgotten exist. Your refusal to perform is not antisocial behavior, it's fierce loyalty to your essential nature. The world needs what you carry. Not everyone will recognize it. Not everyone will appreciate it. Many will be threatened by it. But those who are ready for depth, authenticity, and genuine connection will find in you a lifeline to their own forgotten authenticity. If you've made it this far, if something ancient and true in you has recognized itself in these words, then you know you're not alone. There are others like you, scattered across the world, living their own version of this archetypal pattern. Comment below with just 3 words, I am seen. Let's acknowledge each other. Your journey as part of the 1% isn't about finding ways to fit in better. It's about finding ways to honor your own nature while navigating a world that operates on different principles. It's about developing the skills to protect your authenticity while remaining open to genuine connection. It's about learning to contribute your gifts without sacrificing your essential self. The frequency you carry is rare but not wrong. It's needed but not always wanted. It's precious but not always recognized. Your job is not to convince others of its value. Your job is to steward it carefully, share it appropriately, and trust that it will find its way to those who need what you offer. Remember, you were never broken. You were never too intense. You were never not enough. You were always exactly what you were meant to be. A living bridge between worlds, a quiet flame in a loud world, a keeper of authentic presence in an age of performance. The 1% path is not easy, but it is meaningful. It is not comfortable, but it is real. It is not for everyone, but it is necessary. And if it's your path, then you have everything you need to walk it with grace, courage, and deep self-respect. Stay true to your frequency. The world needs what you carry even when it doesn't know how to ask for it. Until we meet again in the depths where truth lives and authenticity breathes freely, remember who you are, remember why you're here, and never ever apologize for being genuinely yourself.